Have you ever wondered what would happen if Ahsoka Tano had become the Emperor's apprentice instead of Anakin? Today we are going to explore the galaxy far, far away to discover what would happen if the major events from the universe were altered. What if Ahsoka had started her own Jedi Rebellion? How about if Ahsoka had left the Order and become a bounty hunter? We will explore all these questions and more as we ponder. What if? What if Ahsoka Tano had a Force bond with Anakin Skywalker? Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano had fought side by side in countless battles during the Clone Wars. Their connection went beyond words, beyond the need for spoken commands. In the heart of combat, they could sense each other's intent before a single move was made. It wasn't something they discussed outright, but both of them felt it, a Force bond. A silent tether, growing stronger with every mission, every victory, every loss. Ahsoka could feel Anakin's raw emotions like ripples in the Force. His frustration, his determination, his occasional recklessness. In turn, Anakin could feel Ahsoka's unwavering loyalty, her sharp instincts, and her drive to prove herself. They were not just master and apprentice. They were linked. But then, everything changed. The bond shattered. It happened in an instant. One moment, Ahsoka could feel Anakin's presence burning brightly in the Force, and the next, it was gone, as if someone had ripped him away from existence. She gasped, collapsing to her knees. She had felt his pain, his anger, and then, nothing. For all she knew, her master, her friend, was dead. Years passed. The Jedi were gone, the Empire had risen, and Ahsoka had carved her own path in the galaxy, aiding the nascent rebellion under the name Fulcrum. But that was when she felt it. During a battle in the depths of space, when her ship passed close to an Imperial Star Destroyer, she felt it. A presence so familiar, yet so twisted. Anakin. The bond had begun to open, however faintly. Vader immediately shut it down. It happened every time. Whenever Ahsoka reached for him through the Force, she was met with a wall of darkness, a presence that refused to acknowledge her. But she refused to stop trying. She needed to understand. She needed to save him. Ahsoka had spent weeks meditating, searching for a way to pierce through Vader's defenses. She knew there had to be a way. And then she realized, Yavin 4, a planet deeply attuned to the Force. If she went there and strengthened their connection, perhaps she could reach Anakin, not Vader, but Anakin Skywalker himself. When she arrived on the jungle moon, she sat atop the ruins of an ancient temple, making a note that this planet might come in handy as a base for the rebellion. She closed her eyes and let the Force guide her. The bond rushed open like a floodgate. Ahsoka felt herself pulled into a storm. The world around her was black and crimson, shifting like a nightmare made real. She saw glimpses: Mustafar lava, the Jedi Temple burning, Padme's weeping face. And then, she saw him. Anakin Skywalker. Not the masked terror of Vader, but Anakin. His tunic was dark, his hair disheveled, and his face was etched with despair. He looked at her, stunned. You shouldn't be here," he whispered. Ahsoka stepped forward cautiously. "Master!" Anakin turned away, shaking his head. "You should have left me alone. You can fight this," she insisted. "You don't have to be Vader." Anakin laughed bitterly. "You don't understand. Vader isn't separate from me. He is me. And he's too strong." Ahsoka clenched her fists. "I don't believe that." The world around them trembled as if someone had taken notice. "I can't fight him," Anakin whispered, looking down. "I tried. And I lost." Ahsoka felt tears sting her eyes. "You've never lost a fight in your life. Not when you had something worth fighting for. She reached out through the Force, pulling memories from the past. The first time they fought together, laughing beside Rex in the barracks, fixing R2 after another mission, holding Padme's hands in secret. Anakin staggered as if struck. His eyes filled with emotion. The storm raged harder. The bond snapped shut, throwing Ahsoka back into reality. But she knew she had planted the seed. Ahsoka had no doubt about where she needed to go. Mustafar. She followed the Force, landing her ship outside Vader's Black Fortress. But something was wrong. It was silent. The fortress was empty. She ventured deeper inside until she reached the throne room, the vast chamber bathed in blood-red light. And there, standing in the shadows, was him. Ahsoka froze. Vader's dark, looming figure stood before her, the mechanical hiss of his respirator the only sound. But then, he moved. The presence that approached her was not Vader's. Ahsoka's breath caught. It was Anakin. His shoulders weren't as rigid. His posture was different. His presence in the Force had changed. "Anakin," she whispered. He lowered his head. "It's me, Snips." Her throat tightened. "You won," she breathed. "For now," he admitted. "But I'm not ready. Not yet." His fists clenched. "Sidious will sense this change. He'll come for me. Then we prepare," Ahsoka said, determination filling her voice. "We train. We fight him together." Anakin hesitated, looking at her for a long moment. Then, he nodded. Ahsoka exhaled, the tension in her body finally releasing. She had done it. She had saved Anakin Skywalker. Anakin and Ahsoka had vanished into the Outer Rim, spending months in seclusion, training and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Sidious. Anakin was relearning himself, separating what was him from what had been Vader. The dark side still whispered to him, but Ahsoka was his anchor, pulling him back to the light. But there was one thing he had to do before they went any further. He had to visit Padme's grave. Ahsoka hesitated when he first mentioned it, worried about what emotions it might stir within him. But Anakin was resolute. He needed to see it, to face it. And so, they set a course for Naboo. The lush green fields of Naboo stretched before them as they approached the place where Padme Amidala had been laid to rest. It was late afternoon, and the lake shimmered under the golden light. Anakin walked in silence. He had been here before, many years ago, back when he was still Vader. But that time, he had not approached. He had only watched from the shadows, unable to face what he had done. Now, with Ahsoka at his side, he took slow, deliberate steps toward the white marble tomb. Her name was carved elegantly across the surface. Padme Amidala, beloved queen, senator, daughter of Naboo. Anakin exhaled sharply. His flesh hand reached out, tracing the letters. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For a long moment, nothing else existed. Just the wind, the sound of the water lapping against the shore, and the weight of everything he had lost. Ahsoka stood a respectful distance away, watching. She could feel his emotions in the Force. The grief, the regret, the overwhelming sense of failure. "You loved her," Ahsoka said softly. Anakin nodded, his eyes still fixed on the grave. "More than anything." Ahsoka hesitated, then stepped forward. "Do you think she would forgive you?" Anakin clenched his jaw. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I hope she would." From the shadows, someone was watching. Sobe had never forgotten Padme Amidala. The handmaiden had spent the years after Padmé's death working in secret against the Empire, helping to preserve her queen's legacy. She had suspected the truth about Vader for a long time. The timing of Anakin Skywalker's disappearance, Vader's routine visits to Naboo, it all fit together. But seeing it with her own eyes was another thing entirely. She had been tending to the tomb, as she often did, when she noticed the two figures approaching. Ahsoka Tano, unmistakable in her presence, and Darth Vader, moving as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Then she heard it. Anakin! Sobe's breath caught in her throat. Anakin Skywalker was alive. More than that, he was Vader. Her hands shook as she backed away, slipping into the trees before she was seen. She reached for her communicator and transmitted a secure signal. Bail, I have information. You need to hear this immediately. Bail Organa had always known the truth. He had seen Anakin Skywalker cut down Jedi in the Temple with his own eyes. But what Sobe told him next? That Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano were together? That Vader had changed? That was something he hadn't anticipated. He immediately activated the encrypted channel used for Fulcrum agents. It had been silent for months, but now he keyed in a single message. Ahsoka, it's Bail. We need to talk. Minutes later, a secure holochannel flickered to life. Ahsoka's face appeared, wary but calm. Bail, she greeted. Bail leaned forward, eyes sharp. Is it true? Ahsoka exhaled. Yes. He's not Vader anymore. Bail hesitated. And you trust him? She didn't even blink. With my life. Bail rubbed his chin, considering. Listen to me carefully, Ahsoka. I need you to go to Tatooine. Ahsoka frowned. Tatooine? Why? Bail's expression darkened. Because I know someone who needs to see him. Anakin stepped off the ramp of the ship, the twin suns of Tatooine burning overhead. The heat, the dryness, it was all familiar. Too familiar. He hadn't set foot on his homeworld since his mother died. Ahsoka followed him, scanning the horizon. What are we doing here? Anakin turned to her. I don't know. But I can feel something. They walked in silence toward a rocky outcrop near the Jundland wastes. Anakin could feel a presence watching them, waiting. Then, from the shadows of the canyon, a lone figure stepped forward. A man in Jedi robes. His beard was tinged with gray, his eyes tired, but still sharp. Anakin stopped in his tracks. Obi-Wan Kenobi. For a moment, neither of them moved. The years stretched between them, filled with pain, betrayal, and unspoken words. Obi-Wan's lips parted, as if he was struggling to find his voice. He swallowed hard, taking a slow step forward. Anakin, he whispered. Anakin exhaled, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a small, almost wistful smile formed on his lips. Hello, old friend. What if Ahsoka never left the Jedi Order? The Jedi High Council chamber was silent as Ahsoka Tano knelt before the gathered masters. The faces surrounding her were wise and stern. Yoda, Mace Windu, Plo Koon, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Shak-Ti, and the others who had guided her journey from a youngling to this very moment. She felt Anakin's presence behind her, his arms crossed, watching intently. This was a moment he had long believed she deserved. Mace Windu stepped forward, his dark gaze locked onto her. Ahsoka Tano. His voice was deep and commanding. You have proven yourself time and time again on the battlefield. Through wisdom, skill, and determination, you have upheld the values of the Jedi. And now, the Council grants you the title of Jedi Knight. Ahsoka took a deep breath, absorbing the weight of his words. "You are no longer a Padawan. Rise, Jedi Knight Tano." She slowly stood, her heart pounding. The council nodded in approval, and though Mace Windu remained as unreadable as ever, she swore she saw a flicker of respect in his gaze. Anakin grinned and clapped her on the back, unable to contain his pride. "Finally! I was starting to think they'd never come to their senses." Ahsoka smirked. "Maybe they just wanted to make sure I wasn't picking up any of your bad habits, Master." Anakin chuckled, though a hint of sadness passed through his expression. She was no longer his Padawan, but even still, she would always be at his side. With her knighthood came a new responsibility, her own clone battalion. The 332nd Company, formerly under Anakin's command, was now hers, and to lead them, Fives had been promoted to clone captain. Fives stood at attention, but there was a proud smirk beneath his helmet. "So, General Tano, does this mean I finally get to give the orders around here?" Ahsoka crossed her arms. "Dream on, Fives." Her men, her brothers, saluted her, their helmets reflecting the temple lights. She had fought beside them for years, and now they were her responsibility. But despite her new title, Ahsoka was still assigned to missions alongside Anakin more often than not. Their combat efficiency together was unmatched, and though she was no longer his student, she saw a new reckless fire in his eyes, and she was beginning to worry about it. Ahsoka had sensed it for a long time. Anakin was hiding something. She had seen the late nights where he vanished from camp, the way he always seemed to flinch at discussions about the Jedi Code and attachments. But it wasn't until she walked in on him one evening that her suspicions were confirmed. The hollow transmission flickered as Padme Amidala's face appeared, her voice soft. "Anakin, you can't keep pushing yourself like this. I'm worried about..." The moment Ahsoka stepped inside, Anakin shut the transmission off, his face unreadable. Ahsoka raised an eyebrow. "You know, if you're trying to hide something, maybe not cutting the call the second I walk in would be a good start." Anakin tensed. "You didn't hear anything." Ahsoka sighed, folding her arms. "Anakin, I've known for years." His eyes widened. "You, what?" She smirked. "Come on, you think I wouldn't notice? The way you act around her, the way she looks at you. I may have been your Padawan, but I wasn't blind." Anakin sat down, running a hand over his face. "The Council can never know, Ahsoka. If they did..." She interrupted, gently. "Anakin, why does it have to be a secret?" He looked up at her, confused. Ahsoka exhaled. "I don't think attachment is as dangerous as the Jedi believe. Love isn't a weakness, Anakin. And besides, I know how you feel." Anakin frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she whispered, "Lux Bonteri." Anakin blinked, surprised. Ahsoka smiled faintly. "We can't help who we care about. The Jedi Code doesn't change that. Maybe the Order needs to see that." Anakin let her words sink in. He had never expected anyone, especially Ahsoka, to understand. But she did, and that meant more than she would ever know. Then, the nightmares began. Anakin barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Padme dying. Finally, one night, he turned to Ahsoka. He told her everything. Together, they meditated, searching for the truth within the Force. And that's when they saw it. The twins being born. Padme's voice, weak but determined. "There is still good in him. I know it." When the vision ended, Anakin's hands were shaking. He looked at Ahsoka, horrified. This means, for that vision to come true, I have to turn, Ahsoka whispered. Anakin froze. He had never seen himself as the enemy of the Jedi, but the Force had shown them a glimpse of what could be. Ahsoka placed a hand on his shoulder. We can change this. We have to. And so, together they trained. Together, they focused on controlling Anakin's emotions. And together, they ensured the vision would never come to pass. When Palpatine revealed his true identity, Anakin did not hesitate. He went straight to the Jedi Council. Mace Windu's expression was unreadable. You're sure? Anakin nodded. He's the Sith Lord we've been looking for. Mace exhaled. Then stay here, Skywalker. If what you say is true, you will have gained my trust. Anakin swallowed, but obeyed. Instead, it was Ahsoka who followed Mace Windu to the Senate. Ahsoka's breath came fast as she sprinted through the Senate chambers. Her hands tightened around her lightsabers, the hum of the blades echoing through the corridors as she approached the confrontation. She could feel the dark side radiating from the chamber ahead, like an open wound festering in the Force. And then she stepped through the door. Her stomach twisted. The scene before her was carnage. The bodies of Kit Fisto, Agen Kola, and Sassy Teen lay strewn across the floor. Their lightsabers were extinguished, their expressions frozen in death. At the center of the room, standing over them, was Mace Windu, his purple blade locked in a fierce battle against Darth Sidious. The Sith Lord's face was twisted in exertion, his robes billowing as he met Mace's unrelenting onslaught. Ahsoka barely had a moment to process the horror of what she was seeing. Mace's blade battered against Sidious' defenses, driving the Sith Lord back. Sidious' teeth were bared as he tried to counter, but Mace was relentless, his Vopad form feeding off Sidious' own darkness. The battle was turning. With a powerful disarming strike, Mace Windu knocked Sidious' lightsaber from his hand, sending it clattering across the chamber. Sidious fell back against the window, his face twisted in feigned weakness. Mace loomed over him, his saber raised. It's over. Sidious' hands trembled as he reached out desperately. Please. Please don't kill me. Ahsoka hesitated. Something felt wrong. Sidious' voice, though pleading, carried an undercurrent of deceit. Mace didn't hesitate. He's too dangerous to be left alive. Ahsoka stepped forward. Master Windu, stop. That's not the Jedi way. Mace turned his sharp gaze toward her, his expression hard. He's the Sith Lord responsible for all of this. If we don't end him now, he'll destroy everything. Ahsoka shook her head. If we kill him in cold blood, we become no better than the Sith. We have to do this the right way. Arrest him. Put him on trial. Mace clenched his jaw. His blade did not lower. He controls the Senate. He controls the courts. His voice was steel. There is no justice left. The Jedi will never be safe while he lives. Ahsoka swallowed. Then what are we fighting for? For a long moment, Mace hesitated. And then, Sidious struck. In an instant, Sidious launched a devastating Force blast at Ahsoka, sending her slamming into the wall with bone-shattering force. Her vision went black. Mace barely had time to react before Sidious erupted forward, striking like a viper. Their blades clashed in a storm of light and shadow, crackling against each other with ferocious speed. Sidious' face twisted in pure hate, his once pleading expression now replaced with absolute malice. You will not stop me, the Sith Lord hissed. Mace's strikes were precise, his mastery of Vopad pushing him beyond normal Jedi limits. Every movement reflected the Sith's own darkness back at him. Sidious lashed out with unnatural speed, his blade flashing in a web of red light, but Mace dodged, his counterstrike grazing the Sith's arm. Sidious snarled in pain, retaliating with a wave of lightning, but Mace caught it on his saber, the energy crackling against the purple plasma. The duel was relentless, a deadly dance of power and will. Mace drove Sidious back, their blades clashing against the shattered window overlooking the cityscape. Sidious feigned weakness again, his breathing ragged. "Please, I beg you." Mace did not fall for it. With a powerful strike, he shattered Sidious' remaining defenses. The Sith Lord collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged, his crimson saber fallen to the floor. Mace loomed over him, his blade raised for the finishing blow. "This ends now," Mace declared. Sidious' yellow eyes flickered, and then, with the last reserves of his strength, Sidious unleashed a hurricane of Sith lightning. Mace did not flinch. He caught the full brunt of the lightning on his blade, his stance unbreakable. Sidious' face contorted in effort, pouring every ounce of his hate and power into the attack. But Mace Windu did not falter. The Jedi Master stepped forward. For the first time in his entire life, Darth Sidious felt something foreign. Fear. No. Mace swung. The purple blade cleaved through darkness, cutting clean through Sidious' chest. The Sith Lord's scream echoed across the chamber as his body convulsed, the dark side energy within him imploding. Lightning arced wildly, shattering the windows as the room was bathed in blue fire. And then Sidious collapsed. His body hit the floor, steam rising from his lifeless corpse. Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith, Emperor of the Shadows, Orchestrator of War, was dead. Ahsoka's eyes fluttered open, her head pounding. She saw Anakin kneeling beside her, shaking her gently. "You're okay," he breathed in relief. She groaned, pushing herself up. "Did we?" "It's over," Anakin replied. The Jedi Council chamber was silent. Anakin Skywalker stood at the center, his blue eyes steady, though the weight of the moment pressed heavily upon him. The war was over. The Sith were defeated. Palpatine was dead. And yet, for the first time in his life, Anakin felt as if he was truly standing at a crossroads. Around him, the greatest Jedi Masters in the Order, Yoda, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, Shaak Ti, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and others, sat in solemn contemplation. They had gathered here to pass judgment. But not on him. For once, Anakin Skywalker was not on trial. For the first time, they were here to acknowledge him. Mace Windu leaned forward, his dark eyes locked onto Anakin with the same intensity he had always carried. But there was something different now. For years, Anakin had sensed mistrust from Mace. The Jedi Master had never truly accepted him, always holding him at arm's length. But now, there was respect. "You made the right choice, Skywalker," Mace said, his voice low but firm. "You stayed where you were needed. You placed your trust in the Jedi, rather than your emotions. And in doing so, you saved us all." Anakin swallowed. His heart pounded in his chest. He thought back to those moments in the council chamber. How he had wanted to go to Palpatine's office. How the fear of losing Padme had tempted him to make the wrong choice. But he had waited, because Ahsoka had gone instead. Because he had trusted the Jedi way. Mace's gaze was still on him. "That is the mark of a true Jedi. You have shown patience. You have shown wisdom. And most importantly," he paused, "you have shown restraint." Anakin blinked. Obi-Wan, standing beside Yoda, smiled at him with pride. Master Yoda closed his eyes for a moment, before nodding. "Earned, your title has been," Yoda said at last. "Skywalker, a master, you now are." Mace's voice was steady. "You have our respect, Master Skywalker." As Anakin stepped out of the council chamber, Ahsoka was waiting for him. She grinned. "Well, Master Skywalker," she teased, "you finally got what you wanted." Anakin chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, I guess I did." Ahsoka nudged him. "So, what now?" Anakin exhaled, looking out at the golden horizon of Coruscant. "What now?" For the first time, the future was wide open. The Jedi were safe. The Republic was free. Padme was alive. And Anakin Skywalker was exactly where he was meant to be. At peace. At last. What if Ahsoka had found Gunji and the other Padawans after Order 66? The galaxy was in darkness. The Jedi Order was no more. Across the stars, the few survivors of Order 66 were hunted like animals, scattered and broken. Ahsoka Tano had once been part of that order. But she was not a Jedi. Not anymore. Yet, as she stepped onto the abandoned freighter, following the faint pulse in the Force, she realized that her fight was far from over. The ship was silent, its halls dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. The air smelled stale, heavy with the weight of desperation. Then, movement. Ahsoka spun, her hands instinctively going for her hilts. But she froze. 6 young faces stared back at her. They were Padawans. And they were still alive. The younglings had been aboard a transport when Order 66 had turned their entire world upside down. Guided by Master Huyong, the ancient droid who had once helped generations of Jedi forge their lightsabers, they had survived, hiding, running, constantly on the move. But the moment Ahsoka laid eyes on them, she knew the truth. They had no future. Not unless she helped them. "You're alive," Ahsoka whispered, still in shock. Petro, ever brash, nodded. "Barely. We've been running for months." Katuni, more cautious, knowing that Ahsoka had left the Jedi Order. "Are you here to help us?" Ahsoka hesitated. She had spent so long alone, keeping herself detached, hiding in the shadows. But looking at them now, she saw echoes of the Jedi Temple, of what had been lost. She couldn't turn away. "Yeah," she said at last, her voice steady. "I'll help you." Ahsoka knew that taking in 6 Padawans was dangerous. The Empire had Inquisitors scouring the galaxy, hunting down Jedi survivors. But what she hadn't expected was how quickly they would find her. The attack came in the dead of night, while they were hiding in the ruins of an old Clone Wars outpost. The first sign was the shrieking hum of a red lightsaber igniting in the dark. Then, the black-robed figure stepped forward, an Inquisitor. Ahsoka wasted no time. She met him head-on, sabers flashing, dodging his brutal swings. The younglings watched from the shadows, terror in their eyes. But Ahsoka was stronger, faster, better. The Inquisitor faltered, just for a moment. But that was all she needed. With a final strike, she ended him. Silence. Then, a faint beeping. Ahsoka's heart sank. The Inquisitor had activated a locator beacon. They had called in her location, and someone had answered. When Darth Vader learned that his former apprentice was still alive, he did not hesitate. The Inquisitors had failed him time and time again. This was his hunt now. He would find Ahsoka, and she would join him, or die. From that moment forward, nowhere was safe. Ahsoka, Huyong, and the younglings moved from planet to planet, staying ahead of the Empire's reach. She trained them as best she could, helping them hone their abilities while keeping them hidden. Gunji, ever strong, trained with his green-bladed saber in quiet meditation. Biff, timid but wise, grew more confident in his Force abilities. Zat and Gnodi worked together, becoming skilled at piloting and repairs. Katuni and Petro sparred constantly, always pushing each other to improve. But the fear never left them. They could feel Vader getting closer. And then, one of them made a mistake. Petro had always been headstrong, impatient. So when he overheard a rumor about Imperial forces nearby, he thought it was his chance. Against Ahsoka's orders, he snuck off to fight. He never came back. Ahsoka gritted her teeth, staring at the holomap of the Imperial Star Destroyer. The transmission had been brief, Petro's voice shaking as he described his location before the signal cut out. Her first instinct had been rage. He had disobeyed her orders. But now wasn't the time for lectures. Petro was one of them, and she wouldn't leave him behind. Ahsoka turned to the remaining Padawans. Their wide, fearful eyes reminded her of how young they truly were. "I'm going alone," she told them. "Stay hidden. Keep the ship ready." But Katuni started, stepping forward. "No," Ahsoka's voice was firm. "This isn't a discussion." The Padawans looked at each other, torn between their fear and their loyalty. Huyong placed a reassuring hand on Katuni's shoulder, his ancient voice calm. "We must trust Ahsoka," he said. Ahsoka met their gazes one last time before turning away, pulling up her hood as she strode toward the ship's airlock. She could do this. She had to. The Imperial Star Destroyer loomed ahead, its metal hull stretching endlessly against the void of space. Ahsoka clung to the underside of a supply shuttle, her fingers tight against the cold metal as it was pulled into the hangar bay. As soon as the ship docked, she dropped down, pressing herself into the shadows. Troopers moved in formation, unloading cargo and checking supplies. Ahsoka waited, her breath slow and controlled, then slipped through an open corridor. Her body moved like a shadow, silent and precise. Past security checkpoints, past stormtrooper patrols. Every step, every turn, was calculated. She followed the cold pulse of the Force, guiding her toward Petro's presence. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the detention block. Peering around the corner, she spotted two stormtroopers guarding a reinforced door. Ahsoka reached out with the Force. The first trooper stiffened, his blaster lowering. "Hey, I think I heard something down the hall." The other trooper frowned. "What?" "I didn't hear." "Come on, let's check it out." The second trooper hesitated, then followed his partner down the corridor. As soon as they were gone, Ahsoka darted forward, slicing through the door's control panel. The mechanism hissed, and the door slid open. Inside, Petro sat bound to a chair, his face bruised but defiant. "Ahsoka," he gasped. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Ahsoka stepped forward, igniting her lightsaber to cut his restraints. But Petro's face darkened. "No. No, Ahsoka, you have to go. It's a trap." Ahsoka's heart stopped. Then, a cold wave crashed through the Force, suffocating, relentless. A presence so familiar, yet so utterly wrong. She knew that darkness. She had felt it before. The realization hit her like a blaster bolt to the chest. She dropped to her knees, eyes wide in horror. No. The door behind her slammed shut. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Then, the deep, mechanical breathing filled the silence. The air crackled as the red glow of a lightsaber illuminated the room. Darth Vader stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the floor. For a moment, Ahsoka couldn't move. "It's you," she whispered. Vader's helmet tilted slightly. "The apprentice lives." Ahsoka's hands tightened around her sabers. Vader lunged. Their blades clashed, white against red, sending a shockwave through the room. Ahsoka ducked low, spinning beneath his attack, but Vader's strength was overwhelming. Each strike pushed her back, forcing her to retreat. She had fought Inquisitors. She had fought Grievous. But this was different. Blades flashed, sparks flying as they dueled across the room. Vader's movements were precise, relentless. Ahsoka's were swift, adaptive. She dodged his downward strike, flipping over him, only for his force grip to catch her mid-air and hurl her into the wall. Pain shot through her body as she landed hard. Vader strode toward her, towering, unyielding. "You cannot run from this," he said. Ahsoka wiped blood from her lip, pushing herself to her feet. "I'm not running." She charged. The fight surged into the hallway, then into the main hangar, sabers flashing furiously. Then, as Vader swung for her neck, she twisted and slashed his helmet open. The crack echoed through the hangar as a portion of his mask shattered away. Beneath it, a single scarred eye burned through the darkness. Ahsoka froze, and then, in a voice not his own, "Ahsoka!" It was him. It was Anakin. For the briefest second, she saw her master, the man who had trained her, who had protected her, the man she had loved like family. Her voice trembled. "Anakin!" His expression seemed to waver. His breath hitched. Then, Vader snarled. The Sith surged back, shoving her away with the Force. Ahsoka tumbled backward, just as the Padawans burst into the room. Huyong led them, blasters firing as they rushed to Petro. "Ahsoka!" Katuni shouted. "No!" Ahsoka turned, eyes wide. "Get out of here! Now!" Gnodi and Zat quickly untied Petro, supporting him as they ran. Vader moved to intercept them. Ahsoka threw herself in his path. Their blades locked again, but Ahsoka knew she couldn't win. Not this time. So she did the only thing she could. She sealed the blast doors, cutting herself off from the younglings. "No!" Katuni screamed. The Padawans pounded on the door, sensing what was coming. Then, the Force shattered. Ahsoka Tano was gone. Silence. Huyong, his metallic face unreadable, ushered the Padawans away. The younglings drifted through hyperspace, silent. No words were spoken. There was only the weight of loss, and the knowledge that their protector was gone. The galaxy had taken everything from them, and now they were truly on their own. Again. What if Ahsoka had joined Asajj Ventress and become a bounty hunter? The Jedi Temple was behind her now. Ahsoka walked with no destination, her steps slow but deliberate. She had made her choice. She was not a Jedi anymore. The neon glow of Coruscant's underworld flickered above her as she descended into its depths. The air was thick with smoke and desperation, the distant sounds of blasters and speeders blending into the constant hum of the city. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. Then, a shadow moved in the alley ahead. Ahsoka reached for her saber, but there was nothing there. A cold chuckle echoed through the dimly lit street. "Relax, little Jedi," a familiar voice purred. "Oh, I guess that's not what you are anymore." Ahsoka stiffened. From the shadows stepped Asajj Ventress. The ex-Sith tilted her head, arms crossed as she studied Ahsoka. "Didn't expect to find you down here again," Ventress continued. "You look lost." Ahsoka met her gaze, hesitant. She had fought Ventress many times before. And yet, she wasn't her enemy anymore. Not lost, Ahsoka said quietly. Just figuring things out. Ventress smirked. That makes two of us. Ahsoka hesitated. She could sense something different about Ventress now. She wasn't fueled by rage and vengeance the way she used to be. Something had changed. "Why are you still here?" Ahsoka finally asked. "Same as you," Ventress shrugged. "Figuring things out." She leaned against the wall, watching Ahsoka carefully. "Listen, kid. I've been where you are. Cast out. Alone. But let me tell you something. You don't have to wander these streets with no purpose. There's another way." Ahsoka raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Ventress's smile was sharp. "You and me. Bounty hunters." Ahsoka never imagined she'd become a bounty hunter. Yet, months later, here she was, standing in a cantina on Nar Shaddaa, scrolling through a list of jobs while Ventress negotiated with a client. They had built a reputation, not just for their skill, but for their code. Unlike other bounty hunters, Ahsoka and Ventress only took jobs that fit their morals, tracking down criminals, rescuing the innocent, taking out slavers. They were efficient, ruthless, and in demand. "Another contract?" Ventress asked, striding up to Ahsoka. "Looks like it," Ahsoka said, shutting off the holopad. "Some senator's kid got kidnapped by pirates." Ventress smirked. "Good. I was getting bored." They worked together seamlessly, moving from job to job, their pasts behind them, until it all fell apart. The mission was supposed to be simple. Track a high-ranking Black Sun operative on Corellia. Capture him. Collect the bounty. Except it wasn't that easy. The job had been a setup. Ventress had been captured, dragged away into the depths of an Imperial holding facility. Ahsoka had barely escaped, and now she had to get her partner back. But she couldn't do it alone, which is why she found herself standing in a dimly lit hangar on Tatooine, surrounded by some of the most dangerous bounty hunters in the galaxy. Across from her, arms crossed, was Boba Fett. Next to him, the towering reptilian form of Bossk, his sharp claws flexing as he eyed Ahsoka. To her left, Embo adjusted the wide-brimmed hat atop his head, silent but listening. Ahsoka took a breath. "I need your help," she said. Boba scoffed. "And why would we help you?" Ahsoka met his gaze. "Because Ventress has been taken. And if she's being held, that means she's valuable." Bossk growled. "By who?" Ahsoka clenched her fists. "Cad Bane." The room went silent. Boba tilted his head. "Bane." Ahsoka nodded. "He's the one who set us up. And now, he's got Ventress." For a moment, the hunters were quiet. Then, Boba smirked. "Well, that changes things." The plan was simple, at least on paper. Ahsoka and her team would breach the outer perimeter, fight their way through Bane's security, and locate Ventress before it was too late. They had assembled a team of elite bounty hunters, all seasoned professionals with enough firepower to level a small fortress. But Cad Bane was no fool. His stronghold was deep in the industrial heart of Lotho Minor, a decayed world of rusted factories, burning gas vents, and toxic smog. It was the perfect hiding spot for someone who wanted to disappear. And it was a death trap. Ahsoka crouched in the shadows just outside the compound's outer wall, her twin sabers gripped tightly in her hands. To her left, Boba Fett was priming a series of thermal detonators, his helmeted gaze cold and unreadable. Beside him, Bossk flexed his claws, his slitted eyes narrowing as he let out a low, guttural growl. And behind them, Embo knelt in silence, his hand resting on the rim of his wide-brimmed hat, listening to the distant hum of patrolling droids. Ahsoka took a slow breath. This was it. They had to move fast and hard, or they wouldn't get another chance. She pressed a finger to her comm link. "All units, move in." The first explosion shattered the night. Boba's thermal detonators detonated along the perimeter wall, sending flaming debris raining down into the scrapyard below. Before the dust had even settled, Bossk was already moving. The Trandoshan charged forward with a snarl, his massive clawed feet shaking the ground as he raised his blaster and began firing into the smoke. The security droids never stood a chance. Blaster bolts lit up the darkness as Ahsoka and Embo sprinted forward, weaving between the wreckage. Ahsoka ignited her sabers, green and yellow blades cutting through the haze, as she deflected a hail of incoming fire. Droids collapsed under her strikes, their sparking remains crashing to the ground. Embo flipped over a barricade, deflecting a shot with his hat before landing on one of the guards and snapping his neck. Boba took to the air, his jetpack roaring as he strafed the enemy lines with precise blaster fire. For a moment, it seemed like they had the upper hand. Then, the turrets activated. Massive automated cannons unfolded from the stronghold's walls, their barrels glowing as they locked onto their targets. "Move!" Ahsoka shouted. The air screamed as the turrets unleashed a barrage of firepower, ripping through the bounty hunters' ranks like a scythe through grass. The first to fall was Gorvin, a burly Weequay mercenary. A bolt of blue plasma struck him in the chest, sending him sprawling lifelessly into the dirt. Then Score, the Togruta gunslinger, was caught mid-dash, his body torn apart by rapid-fire turbolasers before he could even scream. The rest of the team scattered, desperately dodging the relentless onslaught. Ahsoka clenched her teeth. They had to push forward, or they were done. She locked eyes with Boba, then nodded. "Cover me." With that, she raced ahead, weaving through the wreckage as she closed the distance to the nearest turret. Blaster fire whizzed past her, but she never slowed down. Then, she leapt. Spinning mid-air, she sliced through the turret's barrel, severing it in one clean strike. The weapon exploded, the shockwave sending her crashing to the ground, but the path was open. "Go!" she yelled. Bossk and Embo pushed ahead, cutting through the last of the droids as Boba dropped the final detonator at the blast doors. The explosion tore the entrance wide open. They had their way in. Ahsoka moved silently through the cold metal corridors of the stronghold, her presence a whisper in the Force. The compound was massive, a labyrinth of dark hallways and industrial chambers, all designed to be disorienting to intruders. She kept close to the walls, avoiding the flickering red security lights as she made her way deeper. Every breath was controlled. Every step was precise. Her sabers remained dormant in her hands, their hilts cool against her fingers. She didn't want to ignite them unless absolutely necessary. Stealth was her best weapon right now. Somewhere ahead, Ventress was waiting. She found the security room first. A single Gamorrean guard sat at the controls, lazily chewing on some kind of dried meat. He never heard her coming. In one fluid motion, Ahsoka grabbed him from behind, slammed him into the console, and let his unconscious body slump to the floor. She scanned the screens. There, Ventress, chained inside a reinforced interrogation chamber, her head bowed, her white skin stained with bruises. Ahsoka's jaw tightened. She turned her gaze to the other feeds. No sign of Bane. That was bad. If she couldn't see him, it meant he was watching her. She tapped her comm link. "I've found her," she whispered. No response. Static crackled over the channel. Ahsoka's blood ran cold. Jammed signals. No more time for caution. She turned from the consoles and moved. The doors slid open with a sharp hiss, revealing the cold, dimly lit chamber within. Ventress sat on her knees, bound by heavy durasteel shackles bolted to the floor. Her yellow eyes flicked upward, locking onto Ahsoka. "You're late." Ahsoka didn't smile. Instead, she rushed forward, her sabers still unlit. "I'll get you out of here." Her fingers moved to Ventress's bindings. But the second she touched them, something felt wrong. The metal hummed. Then, electricity surged through her body. Ahsoka cried out, the shock knocking her backwards onto the floor. Her vision blurred. Her muscles spasmed. And then she heard it. A slow, deliberate clap. Well, look who finally showed up. The shadows moved. Cad Bane stepped forward, his wide-brimmed hat casting a long shadow over his crimson eyes. He wasn't alone. From behind him, a squad of heavily armed enforcers emerged, their weapons already trained on Ahsoka. And then, a deep mechanical hum filled the air. Ahsoka's breath caught in her throat. A ray shield flickered to life around the chamber, trapping her inside. Bane grinned, holstering his pistol as he strolled forward. "Knew you couldn't resist, kid," he said. "It was just a matter of time." Ahsoka pushed herself to her feet, shaking off the shock. "You set this up from the beginning." Bane tilted his head. "You're not as dumb as you look." Ahsoka turned to Ventress, whose smirk had faded. The bounty hunter was watching her carefully, waiting. There had to be a way out of this. Ahsoka scanned the room. The shield generator was on the far wall, but she'd never reach it in time. And even if she did, Bane's men would cut her down before she could free Ventress. She clenched her jaw. Think. Then, she heard it. A metallic click. She looked back to Bane. He had drawn a small detonator, his thumb hovering over the trigger. Ahsoka's gut twisted. "If you're thinking of doing something heroic," Bane said casually, "you might want to reconsider." Ahsoka narrowed her eyes. "What's that?" Bane grinned. "Fail-safe." The detonator blinked in his hand. "If I drop this," he continued, "this whole room goes up." Ahsoka's breath hitched. Bane was always careful, always prepared. If he had a backup plan, it meant they weren't walking out of here alive. And then he gave her the choice. "You want her back?" he asked. "Fine." He lowered the shield and tossed something across the room. Ahsoka caught it. A blaster. Her hands tensed. "One shot," Bane said. "Right between the eyes." Ahsoka froze. She understood now. This wasn't just about money. This was about humiliation. If she wanted to save Ventress, she had to kill someone. Not in battle. Not in self-defense. But in cold blood. She swallowed hard. Her fingers curled around the weapon. Her heart thundered in her chest. Ventress watched her, saying nothing. Bane just smirked. He was enjoying this. Ahsoka took a deep breath. She lifted the blaster. And then, she pulled the trigger. But not at the enforcer in front of her. At the shield generator. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending sparks raining down as the containment field collapsed. Ahsoka moved instantly, leaping forward, her sabers igniting in a flash. Bane cursed and dove for cover. Ventress ripped herself free, yanking the broken chains from the floor as she leapt up to join the fight. Ahsoka didn't hesitate. She grabbed Ventress by the arm. "Run!" They bolted for the exit, dodging blaster fire as alarms screamed through the facility. Bane's men were in chaos, and as Ahsoka and Ventress raced toward the docking bay, they realized something else. Boba and the others were gone. They had been abandoned. Alone and hunted, Ahsoka and Ventress disappeared into the jungle. They had survived for now, but they were not safe just yet. What if Ahsoka becomes the Emperor's apprentice instead of Anakin? The chamber was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the grand window overlooking Coruscant's sprawling cityscape. Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano stood before Chancellor Palpatine, summoned for a private audience. Ahsoka wasn't sure why she felt uneasy. She had been in this office many times before. Yet, something about this moment felt different. Palpatine's piercing gaze lingered on her for a beat too long. Then, with a practiced smile, he addressed them. "My dear friends," he said smoothly, "the war has reached a critical juncture. The time has come to explore alternatives to endless bloodshed." Ahsoka and Anakin exchanged a glance. "Alternatives?" Anakin questioned. Palpatine nodded. "Peace negotiations." Ahsoka's brow furrowed. "With the Separatists?" Palpatine clasped his hands behind his back, stepping toward the large window. "Indeed," he murmured. "There are those among them who wish to end this war as much as we do." Anakin folded his arms, skeptical. "You really think Dooku's council will listen?" Palpatine chuckled. "One of them already has." Ahsoka tilted her head. "Who?" Palpatine turned to face them. "I'm afraid I cannot disclose that information," he said. "But I can tell you this. I require the two of you to accompany me for security. You are the greatest warriors the Republic has. Who better to ensure my safety?" Anakin nodded. "Of course, Chancellor." Ahsoka nodded as well. Palpatine smiled, but then his gaze shifted to her once more, and his expression changed. For the first time, it was not the mask of a kind and wise leader. It was something else. Something calculating. Ahsoka felt a shiver down her spine, and then, without her knowing, he reached out through the Force. It was subtle, a whisper against her presence. He could feel a pulse of pure light coursing through her veins, vast, powerful, divine. But beneath it was something else. A raging, writhing storm of darkness, buried deep, struggling to break free. Palpatine's eyes narrowed slightly. Fascinating. Unbeknownst to both of them, the sun's corruption still lingered within her. The darkness had not left her. No, she had merely been fighting it all this time, and fighting it alone. He could feel the power of the lingering darkness. A slow smile curled on Palpatine's lips. This changed everything. They departed Coruscant that evening, aboard a sleek diplomatic cruiser. The destination was a neutral world, an abandoned separatist outpost on Ord Vellum, where a high-ranking official had agreed to meet. The journey was quiet. Ahsoka sat alone in her quarters, feeling off. Had she imagined it? No. Something was wrong. But what? The ship landed in the vast ruins of the outpost. Ahsoka and Anakin flanked Palpatine as they moved forward, wary of any betrayal. The wind howled through the wreckage. It was eerily silent. Then, blast of fire erupted from the cliffs. Ambush! Anakin ignited his saber instantly, deflecting bolts as battle droids emerged from the ruins. "Stay with the Chancellor," he shouted. Ahsoka nodded, stepping in front of Palpatine as Anakin charged into battle. The moment he was gone, Palpatine moved. Ahsoka barely had time to react as something struck her from behind. She collapsed to her knees, dazed. A metallic canister clattered to the ground before her, hissing as a thick purple mist poured out. She coughed, trying to move, but her limbs felt heavy. Her vision blurred. The force inside her twisted. Darkness, pure, unfiltered darkness seeped into her veins, burning her from the inside out. She gasped, clutching her head as pain racked her entire being. She heard Palpatine's voice, low, calm, commanding. "Do not resist." Ahsoka's breath hitched. She could feel it now, the dark side swelling within her. She could remember what she had been forced to forget. It was him. The son of Mortis had infected her all that time ago. And now, Palpatine had awakened it. "No," she choked out, trembling. Palpatine knelt beside her, watching with a smirk. "Ah, my dear. The darkness is not your enemy." She squeezed her eyes shut. She could feel it consuming her. The cold, suffocating power. Palpatine leaned closer, whispering, "You have always been powerful, Ahsoka. But you have been limited by Jedi lies." Her hands clawed at the ground. The pain was unbearable. The light inside her struggled, desperate to fight back. But it was losing. The dark side swarmed over it, drowning it out. Her fingers dug into the dirt. And then, her breathing slowed. She lifted her head, and her eyes turned yellow. Palpatine grinned. "Rise, my apprentice." Ahsoka stood, and she was not Ahsoka Tano anymore. Anakin rushed back toward the landing site, lightsaber still ignited. "Chancellor, Ahsoka." As he emerged onto the plateau, he froze. Ahsoka stood before Palpatine. Her posture was different. Her presence was different. Anakin's stomach dropped. "Ahsoka." She turned to him. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and she smiled. Anakin staggered back. No, no, this couldn't be happening. Palpatine gestured forward. "Kill him." Ahsoka's twin sabers ignited, and she lunged. Anakin barely had time to block. Their blades clashed, sending sparks flying into the air. Anakin's mind was reeling. This wasn't just some Sith technique. It wasn't mind control. It was her. Something had broken inside her. Something had changed. And for the first time in his life, Anakin Skywalker felt fear. Anakin gritted his teeth as Ahsoka's sabers bore down on him. Her strikes were relentless, fast, unpredictable, a brutal storm of offense that pushed him back with each blow. This wasn't the same Ahsoka he had trained. She had always been aggressive, but her movements had balance, restraint. Now, there was only rage. Her golden eyes burned with something ancient, something terrifying. Anakin barely managed to parry a vicious downward slash, the impact rattling his bones. "Ahsoka! Stop this!" She didn't answer. She just kept attacking. Her speed was overwhelming, her strength unnatural. Anakin was the strongest Jedi alive. Only Obi-Wan or Yoda could rival him in pure skill. But this Ahsoka, she fought like a demon, like she had tapped into something beyond even the Sith. From the side, Palpatine observed with satisfaction. The experiment had been a success. The sun's influence had been dormant within Ahsoka for years. A rare gift, a vessel of both light and dark, so much potential wasted on the Jedi. And now, she was his new apprentice, his chosen one. Palpatine's gaze flickered to Anakin. He had once intended to mold Skywalker into the Sith's future, but Anakin was a Jedi through and through, despite his anger, despite his emotions. Ahsoka, however, she had already walked away from the Order once. She had already tasted exile. She was the perfect apprentice. And after today, she would never look back. Anakin's boots slid backward in the dirt as Ahsoka unleashed a furious combo, driving him toward the edge of the plateau. His mind was racing. How did this happen? What had Palpatine done to her? She had fallen into the dark once before, on Mortis. But they had saved her. She had been saved. "Listen to me," Anakin shouted, blocking another powerful overhead strike. "Ahsoka, you don't have to do this." She snarled, pressing harder. Her strength was unreal. Anakin had never struggled against her before. But now, he was losing ground. Her eyes flashed, her lips curling into a cold smirk. "You are weak." Anakin's stomach dropped. Those weren't her words. That was the son's voice. A chill ran through him. This wasn't just Ahsoka. It was something else. Something older. Something wrong. And it had consumed her. Ahsoka feinted left, then spun into a brutal reverse stab aimed at his gut. Anakin barely twisted away in time, feeling the heat of her red blade graze his tunic. She was too fast. Too strong. She had never been able to outmatch him before. But now, he was fighting for his life. Anakin steeled himself. If he wanted to save her, if he wanted to bring his Ahsoka back, he needed to stop holding back. He needed to end this. Summoning the full power of the Force, Anakin slammed his palm forward. A massive shockwave erupted between them, hurling Ahsoka backward. She skidded across the ground, flipping onto her feet effortlessly. But for just a moment, her expression flickered. Something in her eyes shifted, and Anakin saw it. A brief glimpse of recognition, of fear, of Ahsoka. His heart clenched. There was still light in her. It was buried, drowning beneath the darkness, but it was still there. He had to save her. He had to. Palpatine stepped forward. "That is enough." Ahsoka's golden gaze snapped toward him. The Emperor's lips curled into a smile. "Kill him." Ahsoka hesitated. Just for a second. And that second was everything. Anakin seized the moment, reaching deep into the Force, and with one final push, he blasted her backward with all his might. Ahsoka slammed into the ruins behind her, her head hitting stone. And then, silence. Her sabers clattered to the ground. She didn't move. Anakin's breath came ragged. His hands were shaking. Palpatine's expression darkened. But he said nothing. Then, without another word, the Sith Lord turned and strode back toward the ship. Anakin staggered forward, his heart pounding. He dropped to his knees beside Ahsoka's motionless form, pressing his fingers to her throat. A pulse. She was alive, but unconscious. She needed help. He needed to. Pain exploded through his body. Anakin gasped, collapsing as lightning surged through him. Palpatine stood above him, hand raised. The Sith Lord's voice was deathly calm. "You disappoint me, Anakin." Anakin's screams echoed into the night. Palpatine's shuttle lifted off. Ahsoka lay still within the ship's medical chamber, unconscious. Palpatine sat in his throne, watching the stars blur past the viewport. He activated his comlink. "Execute Order 66. Ahsoka's eyes snapped open. The sky above Coruscant burned. The Jedi Temple, once the shining heart of the Order, was now a battlefield. Fire and smoke choked the air as clone troopers stormed the halls, blaster fire lighting up the darkness. And at the forefront of the slaughter, Ahsoka Tano. She moved through the temple like a shadow, her twin blades cutting through Jedi and younglings alike. The daughter's power still lingered within her, but it was buried beneath the overwhelming darkness of the sun and Palpatine's alchemy. The Ahsoka who had once stood for justice, for hope, was gone. In her place was a weapon of the Sith. Ahsoka's lightsabers hummed as she stalked through the temple halls, her golden eyes scanning for survivors. Clone troopers marched behind her, executing any remaining Jedi they found. Her enhanced senses could feel them. Fear, desperation, weakness. She had once been one of them, but now they were prey. Ahead, a group of Jedi Knights stood in formation, their sabers igniting in defiance. Shock T led them, her blue blade casting a glow across the ruined corridor. "Ahsoka!" Her voice was firm, unwavering. "I don't know what this Sith Lord has done to you, but you can fight this." Ahsoka tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Then, she lunged. Shock T barely raised her blade in time. Ahsoka struck like a storm, her twin sabers a blur of light and death. Shock T was a master, one of the finest duelists in the Order. But Ahsoka, she was something else. The sun's dark influence had amplified her speed, her strength, her rage. The other Jedi Knights rushed forward to aid their master, and Ahsoka cut them down. One by one, they fell. She was unstoppable. Finally, it was just her and Shock T. The Togruta Jedi Master breathed heavily, her stance steady but faltering. Ahsoka twirled her sabers, the hum of her blades filling the silence. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. Shock T's eyes narrowed. "Not for myself," she said. "For you." Ahsoka snarled and attacked. In the lower levels of the temple, Mace Windu stood with a small band of Jedi. The clones had overrun most of the temple, and the dark presence leading them was unstoppable. Windu had fought many Sith in his time, Dooku, Sidious, and lesser Darksiders. But this was something different. Ahsoka's power was unnatural, and it was only getting stronger. The temple was lost. They had one chance: escape. The remaining Jedi had to scatter. If even a handful survived, the Jedi could live on. But first, he had to confront Ahsoka. Mace Windu met Ahsoka in the temple's central chamber. The great statues of Jedi past loomed over them, casting long shadows in the firelight. Ahsoka stood at the center, her red sabers igniting in the darkness. Windu ignited his purple blade. He studied her, his sharp gaze unwavering. "This is your last chance, Ahsoka." His voice was calm, but firm. "Step away from this path." Ahsoka smiled. "A cold, cruel thing. I'm not afraid of you." Windu nodded once. Then, he attacked. Their sabers clashed with a deafening crack, the shockwave shattering the stone beneath them. Windu fought with Vopad, the unpredictable, ferocious lightsaber form that had allowed him to turn one's dark side energy back onto themselves. Ahsoka fought with pure instinct, enhanced by the unnatural power of the sun. Their blades became a blur, strikes coming faster than the eye could follow. Windu's movements were precise, controlled, channeling Ahsoka's darkness against her. But Ahsoka was relentless. She struck with rage, her speed forcing Windu onto the defensive. Then, she feinted left, forcing Windu to counter, and with inhuman speed, she twisted. Her blade slashed across his side. Windu staggered, clutching his wound. Ahsoka grinned. But before she could strike again, an explosion rocked the temple. She turned, eyes narrowing. A ship was landing outside, and she could feel it. Anakin Skywalker was here. Anakin Skywalker stepped off the ship, his blue saber igniting. Beside him, Obi-Wan Kenobi's saber ignited as well. They had come for her. For their friend. For the Jedi. For the galaxy. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ruins of the Jedi Temple smoldered, fire casting twisted shadows against the stone pillars. Anakin and Obi-Wan stood at the temple entrance, their lightsabers humming. Ahead of them, Ahsoka Tano. Her golden eyes burned with unnatural fire, and her twin sabers crackled in the darkness. She was no longer the Padawan they once knew, no longer their friend. She was the Emperor's wrath, and she was waiting for them. Anakin stepped forward, his blue saber held firm. He searched Ahsoka's face for any sign of the girl he once trained, but all he saw was rage. "Ahsoka," he said, "stop this." Ahsoka tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand, Master," she whispered. "I see clearly now." Obi-Wan's voice was steady. "Ahsoka, listen to yourself. This isn't you." Ahsoka laughed. A cold, bitter sound. "You still think you can save me?" Her grip on her sabers tightened. "You're too late." Anakin's jaw clenched. "Then I guess we'll have to stop you." Her smile faded. Then, she attacked. Ahsoka lunged, her sabers a blur of red light. Anakin parried, stepping back as her strikes came like a storm. Obi-Wan moved to flank, but Ahsoka spun, her second saber slashing toward his throat. Obi-Wan barely dodged, forced on the defensive. Her speed was unreal, faster than Anakin remembered. Anakin clenched his jaw. He had to end this, fast. He feinted high, then dropped low, sweeping his saber toward her legs. Ahsoka leapt, twisting midair, bringing both sabers crashing down toward him. Anakin caught them on his blade. The impact shook the ground. Obi-Wan used the opening. He slashed toward her exposed side. Ahsoka saw it. Too late. Obi-Wan's saber grazed her arm, searing through her shoulder. She hissed in pain, and unleashed a force wave. Anakin and Obi-Wan were blasted backward, slamming into the temple pillars. Ahsoka panted, cradling her wounded arm. Her eyes burned with hatred. And then, she laughed. "You're holding back." Her voice was laced with venom. "Afraid to kill me?" Anakin's breath was heavy. "Ahsoka," he said, voice strained. "We don't have to do this." Her grip tightened on her sabers. "Yes, we do." Then, she charged. Their blades clashed again, the temple walls trembling with each impact. Obi-Wan saw it first. Anakin was slowing down, not because he was tired, because he was hesitating, because this was Ahsoka, and she was going to kill him for it. Ahsoka twisted, her saber slashing across his chest. Anakin barely blocked in time. Obi-Wan moved in, striking high, forcing her back. But she was relentless. Her rage fueled her, the darkness empowering her movements. And then, she saw an opening. Ahsoka feinted right, then dropped low, kicking Anakin's legs out from under him. He hit the ground, and she was on him. Her saber descended, aiming for his heart. Anakin threw up his hands, and caught the blade in the Force. For the first time in the fight, Ahsoka hesitated. Anakin's blue eyes blazed with power, raw, unrestrained. The Force itself answered him, pushing back against the sun's darkness within her. Ahsoka gasped, her body trembling. Anakin stood. His presence in the Force was blinding, like a sun burning away the shadows. And for the first time, Ahsoka felt fear. "Ahsoka." Anakin's voice was calm, but firm. "I know you're in there." Her golden eyes flickered. The darkness wavered, just for a second, and then Ahsoka screamed. Her sabers fell from her hands, her body convulsing as the darkness inside her fought back. Anakin stepped forward and placed his hand on her forehead. A surge of light exploded from him, and the darkness shattered. Ahsoka's body collapsed. Her eyes, once burning with hate, were blue again. Anakin knelt beside her. "She's okay," he said, breathless. Obi-Wan sighed in relief. But the battle wasn't over. "Not yet." "Come on," Anakin said. "Yoda needs our help." In the Senate chamber, Grand Master Yoda battled the Dark Lord of the Sith. Lightning crackled through the air as Yoda leapt between the Senate pods, dodging Sidious attacks. The Sith Lord laughed, his face twisted with delight. "You cannot defeat me, Master Jedi." Yoda gritted his teeth. "Defeat you, I must." He spun his green saber, deflecting another surge of lightning. And then Anakin and Obi-Wan arrived. Sidious' eyes narrowed. "Skywalker," he sneered. "So the Jedi sent you to die as well?" Anakin stepped forward, his blue blade igniting. "You made a mistake, Chancellor." Sidious chuckled. "And what mistake was that?" Anakin's expression was calm. "You chose my Padawan." Then they attacked. 3 Jedi, 1 Sith. The battle that would decide the future of the galaxy began. Sidious struck first, unleashing a torrent of Force lightning. Anakin blocked, channeling the energy with the Force. Obi-Wan flanked, his blue blade slashing. Yoda leapt, spinning through the air, striking from above. Sidious was fast, but he was outnumbered. For the first time in his long rule, Sidious was on the defensive. Blades clashed, lightning surged. The room shook under the power of the duel. And finally, Anakin saw his chance. Sidious overextended. Just for a moment, Anakin lunged. His blue saber pierced the Sith Lord's chest. Sidious' eyes widened. He gasped and collapsed. It was over. The Sith were defeated. The galaxy would change forever. But the war wasn't finished yet. What if Ahsoka had recruited more surviving Jedi into the rebellion? After the fall of the Republic, after the Jedi Order was reduced to ashes, Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex stood side by side, watching the embers of the galaxy flicker in the growing shadow of the Empire. The rebellion was still young, a fragile ember struggling to ignite. Rex leaned against the holotable in their makeshift base, deep in thought. "You ever wonder, Ahsoka?" he murmured. "Wonder what?" He met her gaze. "How many more are still out there?" She frowned. "The Jedi." Rex nodded. "If we could find them, bring them together, maybe we'd stand a chance." Ahsoka's heart ached at the thought. She had spent so long hiding, believing that her past as a Jedi was something she had to leave behind. But what if it was time to stop running? What if it was time to fight? Ahsoka nodded. "We find them," she said. "We bring the Jedi back." Over the years, Ahsoka and Rex went on countless missions, searching the stars for those who had once been warriors of peace. Some had lost faith. Some had lost hope. But none had lost their power. One by one, the lost Jedi were found. Their first lead took them to a remote world in the Mid-Rim, where Imperial forces were investigating rumors of a Jedi sighting. Ahsoka and Rex arrived under the cover of darkness, infiltrating a half-built Imperial outpost. Blaster fire echoed through the steel corridors. Someone was fighting back. And then they saw him. A young man with fiery red hair, wielding an orange lightsaber, cutting through stormtroopers with skillful, feral precision. Cal Kestis. When the battle ended, Cal turned to them, breathing heavily. "I know who you are," he said, eyeing Ahsoka warily. "You were a Jedi." "I always was," she said simply. "I just didn't always know it." Cal hesitated, looking around at the bodies of fallen Imperials. "I tried to run," he admitted. "Tried to live a quiet life. But they won't stop coming." Ahsoka placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then stop running." Cal joined them. The search for Oppo Rancisis led them deep into the unknown regions, where Ahsoka followed an old Jedi distress signal to a forgotten world. There, hidden in a vast jungle temple, they found the Thespesian Jedi Master, long thought dead. His once proud mane was now streaked with silver, his face lined with age. "I sensed you coming," he rasped, coiling his serpentine body around a moss-covered throne. "I thought you were gone," Ahsoka said. "Perhaps I should be," he admitted. "I have meditated for years, waiting for the will of the Force to reveal itself." Rex scoffed. "And what has the Force told you?" Oppo's sharp eyes gleamed. "That the time for waiting is over." He joined them. Finding Romkota was the easiest. The hard part was getting him to agree. They found him on a lawless world, leading a band of mercenaries in a guerrilla war against the Empire. Drunk, battle-worn, and angry, Kota had never stopped fighting. When Ahsoka approached him, he scowled. "The Jedi are dead, girl." She activated her sabers, the twin white blades illuminating her face. "Not all of them." Kota smirked. "I hope you have a good fight planned." She did. And he joined them. Felucia. The jungle world had become a graveyard, littered with the remains of clone troopers and Jedi alike. Yet, somehow, Shock T lived. The Togruta Master had survived in exile, guiding the native Felucians, protecting them from Imperial slavers. When Ahsoka and Rex found her, she was kneeling at a shrine, eyes closed. "I knew you would come," she said softly. Ahsoka knelt beside her. "We need you." Shock T smiled, eyes heavy with sorrow. "The Jedi are broken." "Then let's rebuild them," Ahsoka said. Shock T stood, and she joined them. Finding Barriss was a mistake. Ahsoka never intended to seek out the woman who had once betrayed her. But fate had other plans. They found her imprisoned on an Imperial transport, shackled in binders, waiting to be executed. When Ahsoka entered the cell, Barriss looked up, silent. Ahsoka clenched her fists. "I should leave you here." Barriss closed her eyes. "I wouldn't blame you." Rex glanced between them. "Ahsoka." Ahsoka inhaled sharply. "We need every Jedi we can get." She ignited her saber and cut Barriss' chains. Barriss looked at her, shocked. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Then make it count," Ahsoka said. Barriss Offee joined them. Of all the Jedi, Quinlan Vos was the hardest to find, and even harder to convince. He had survived the purge by hiding in the criminal underworld, changing names, faces, identities. When Ahsoka and Rex found him, he smirked. "Figures you'd come looking for me," he said. "We need your help," Ahsoka said. "Sorry, kid. I don't do help anymore." Rex crossed his arms. "You're really gonna sit back and let the Empire win?" Quinlan hesitated. Then, "All right, I'm in." Their search for more survivors led them to Dantooine, where whispers spoke of a silver-haired rogue who spent his days gambling, drinking, and telling wild stories about the Clone Wars. Ahsoka and Rex found him in a dimly lit cantina, leaning back in his chair, boots propped up on the table, a half-empty bottle of Wyron's Reserve in one hand and a sabacc card twirling between his fingers. "Did I ever tell ya about the time I outdueled Count Dooku?" Rael announced to the gathered patrons, his grin lopsided and infectious. "Man had style, I'll give him that. But you see, I had the advantage. I was completely plastered at the time. He never saw it comin'." The crowd laughed, and so did Rael, until he caught sight of Ahsoka and Rex standing in the doorway. His grin widened. "Well, well, well. If it ain't the kid who walked away from the temple," he said, sitting up and taking a swig from his bottle. "What brings you two to my humble corner of the galaxy? Don't tell me. The Jedi finally decided they miss my roguish charm." "We're putting together a team," Ahsoka said, stepping forward. "We need every Jedi we can find." Rael chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, darlin', I hate to break it to you, but I ain't been a Jedi for a long time." He poured another drink and slid it across the table to Rex. "But I gotta admit, I do miss the thrill of a good fight." He leaned forward, his expression shifting from playful to curious. "What exactly are we fightin' for?" Rex took the offered drink, gave Rael a knowing smirk, and simply said, "For the Republic." Rael stared at them for a beat, then grinned and tossed back the rest of his drink. "Well, hell. Why didn't you say so sooner?" He grabbed his battered lightsaber hilt, holstered his blaster, and stood up with a flourish. "All right, kid. Let's go raise some hell." With the combined might of Jedi and clone veterans, the rebellion became a true force against the Empire. They didn't just sabotage Imperial operations. They crushed them. Across the galaxy, their forces led mission after mission, striking where the Empire least expected. Battle of Sullust. Cal Kestis and Shock T led a daring raid on an Imperial supply depot, crippling the Empire's fuel distribution. Quinlan Vos and Barriss Offee infiltrated an ISB intelligence center, feeding critical data to the rebellion. Rom Kota and Oppo Rancisis led an all-out assault on an Imperial garrison, wiping out an entire legion of stormtroopers. For the first time, the Empire was losing. For the first time, the rebellion was winning. The moment the Jedi became a true threat, the Inquisitors were removed from the fight. Darth Vader took their place. He personally led the hunt, and one by one, he cut them down. Cal Kestis was the first to go. On Mandalore, he led a desperate battle against Imperial forces, only for Vader to arrive mid-fight. Cal fought bravely, his dual lightsabers clashing against Vader's overwhelming strength. But in the end, he was no match. A single stroke of Vader's crimson blade cut him down. The Mandalorian resistance watched in horror as their Jedi leader fell. The Empire crushed them soon after. Rom Kota and Oppo Rancisis fell next. Their forces had gathered on Duro, preparing for a decisive strike against an Imperial command post. Vader arrived alone. The Jedi Masters faced him together, two warriors trained in the art of war. For a moment, it seemed as though they stood a chance. Then Vader's blade tore through Kota's chest. Rancisis, overwhelmed with rage, launched into a frenzied assault, but the Sith Lord was too powerful. With a brutal force crush, Vader ended him. Shock T died on Felucia. She had returned to protect her people, only for Vader to follow her there. Ahsoka and the others tried to reach her, but they were too late. By the time they arrived, they found only her lifeless body, her lightsaber still clutched in her hand. Felucia burned in the aftermath. Barriss Offee and Quinlan Vos were the last to fall before the final battle. They were leading an operation on Corellia when Vader's fleet arrived. Their mission turned into a massacre. Barriss fought desperately, trying to hold off the advancing Imperials so the rebels could escape. Quinlan fought by her side, until Vader arrived. The two Jedi attacked together, striking from opposite angles. Vader cut them down in 3 moves. The last thing Barriss saw was Quinlan's body collapsing beside hers. Now, only a handful remained. Ahsoka Tano, Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger, Captain Rex, Echo, Gregor and the Bad Batch. This was all that was left of Ahsoka's faction. Hunted across the galaxy, they made their final stand on the world of Taith, where an old separatist stronghold provided their last refuge. Vader arrived with an army. The battle was relentless. The Bad Batch fought to the bitter end, taking down hordes of stormtroopers. But one by one, they fell. Gregor was gunned down, refusing to retreat. Wrecker was blown apart, covering their escape. Crosshair sacrificed himself to save Omega. Even Kanan and Ezra barely survived the onslaught. And then, Vader arrived. The others were wounded. They needed time to reach the ship. Ahsoka stood in their way, igniting her twin sabers. Vader's red blade crackled to life. "You cannot win," he said. "I don't need to," Ahsoka whispered. She attacked. Their blades clashed, the force of their strikes shattering the durasteel floor beneath them. Ahsoka fought with everything she had. She was faster, more agile, but Vader was stronger. He countered every strike, forcing her back with sheer, overwhelming power. Ahsoka dodged, flipped, struck back, but Vader was relentless. A single crushing blow sent her sprawling across the ground. She gasped for breath, her body screaming in pain. Vader loomed over her, raising his saber for the killing strike. She could see the others reaching the ship. She had done her job. Ahsoka closed her eyes and whispered her final words. "May the Force be with you." Vader struck her down. As the ship took off, escaping into the stars, Rex and Ezra screamed her name. But she was gone. The fight was over. Vader had won. The Jedi were dead. But the rebellion lived on. Because of Ahsoka. Because of her sacrifice. And though she was gone, her legacy would never fade. What if Ahsoka had returned to the Jedi Temple during Order 66? The air was thick with smoke and chaos when Ahsoka's shuttle entered Coruscant's atmosphere. The Jedi Temple, standing tall against the night sky, was burning. The familiar blue beacon of its spires was flickering, warning of an emergency within. Ahsoka had returned home, only to find it under siege. Beside her, Maul stirred, still restrained in the Force cage she had placed him in. His golden eyes gleamed with intrigue as he saw the temple in flames. "Ah, the fall of the Jedi," he murmured. "I told you, child. You were always destined to be here." Ahsoka ignored him, her mind racing. She reached out through the Force, hoping to sense Master Yoda, Obi-Wan, anyone, but all she felt was death, betrayal, and darkness. Then she felt him, Anakin, and he was inside the temple, leading the attack. Her breath caught. No, that wasn't possible. "Skywalker," Maul drawled, sensing her distress. "You feel it, don't you? He has become Sidious's pawn. I tried to warn you." Ahsoka turned on him, stepping closer to the Force cage, her voice tight. "If you truly hate Sidious," she said, "then now's your chance." She released him. Maul grinned, stepping out of the Force cage and rolling his shoulders. "Ah, little one," he said, retrieving his dual-bladed lightsaber from a nearby crate. "You may yet be more dangerous than I thought." She held up a warning hand. "You get your chance to run. I suggest you take it." "I have my own plans," Maul said smoothly, igniting his red blade. But I do appreciate the head start. Then, with a burst of force speed, Maul leapt into the shadows, toward the oncoming 501st clones. The first squad of clones never saw him coming. Maul dropped from the ceiling like a predator, bisecting the leading trooper before he could even lift his rifle. With a fluid motion, he spun his saber behind him, impaling two more. The hallways erupted into blaster fire, but Maul was already moving. He leapt over their heads, twisting mid-air, his blade cutting through the clones like a storm. He grabbed one trooper with the force, using him as a human shield against the onslaught of red bolts. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent the clone hurling into his comrades, knocking them down like dominoes. More squads rushed in, flanking him. He only grinned. With a single gesture, he ripped the door panels off the walls and sent them flying into the troopers, crushing them instantly. He leapt over the barricade, spinning, slicing, and carving his way through the clone ranks. Then, he saw an ARC trooper trying to radio for reinforcements. With a snap of his fingers, Maul yanked the comlink from the clone's grip and crushed it in the air. "I believe," Maul mused, stepping forward, "that your reinforcements won't be coming." The trooper reached for his pistol. Too late. Maul drove his saber through his chest. He turned toward the escape route. With the Jedi distracted, he would vanish into the chaos. The moment Ahsoka entered the temple, she was overwhelmed. Bodies littered the grand halls, Jedi and clones alike. The once pristine marble floors were streaked with blood and ash, the walls scorched with blaster fire and lightsaber burns. Statues of great Jedi Masters had been toppled and shattered, their remnants scattered among the dead. She heard a youngling scream in terror from a distant corridor. Then came the sound of blaster fire. Ahsoka moved on instinct, her twin blue sabers igniting as she sprinted toward the sound. She turned a corner to see a group of clone troopers advancing on a pair of Jedi Padawans, both barely in their teens. Ahsoka struck. She was a blur of motion, her blades deflecting the blaster bolts before she leaped into the fray. Her sabers carved through the troopers in precise, deadly arcs, cutting them down before they could react. One of the Padawans collapsed, trembling. The other, a Twi'lek girl, barely managed to lift her own lightsaber. "You're not safe anymore," Ahsoka said quickly. "Go. Find the others. Don't stop running." The Padawans nodded, disappearing down the corridor. Ahsoka pressed forward, her sabers slicing through the growing numbers of troopers. Explosions rocked the halls as the temple's defenses crumbled. Then, as she neared the grand chamber leading to the Padawan training hall, she saw him. Anakin Skywalker. He stood at the far end of the hall, his dark robe billowing, his face partially obscured by the glow of his ignited blue saber. And in front of him stood the terrified Padawans. Ahsoka felt her stomach drop. "Anakin!" He didn't answer. He only raised his lightsaber. Ahsoka moved on instinct, leaping between Anakin and the children, her sabers crossed in a defensive stance. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Anakin's face was hard, unreadable. "Stand down, Ahsoka." She shook her head. "I don't believe this. I know you. You wouldn't." "You don't know anything," he interrupted, stepping forward. His voice was cold, emotionless. "The Jedi betrayed the Republic. They betrayed me." He struck. Ahsoka barely had time to parry, her sabers locking against his with a crackling hiss. The impact rattled her arms. Anakin was stronger than he'd ever been before. With a burst of power, he shoved her back, sending her skidding across the temple floor. He lunged again, faster than she'd ever seen him move. She ducked under his swiping strike, countering with a low kick to his side. He barely reacted, twisting his body and slamming his elbow into her back, knocking the air from her lungs. Ahsoka rolled away, using the momentum to launch into a spinning counterattack. Her sabers whirled in a defensive blur, forcing Anakin to step back. But his movements were measured, controlled. This wasn't the same Anakin she had fought beside. This was something else. Something darker. She needed to get through to him. "I know about Padme," she said between breaths. Anakin stopped mid-step. Ahsoka pressed forward. "You're doing this for her, aren't you?" His grip tightened on his saber. "You think she'd want this?" Ahsoka continued. "You think she'd want you to murder children?" His breathing hitched, but then his face hardened again. "Sidious lied to you," she said. "Maul told me everything. This was his plan. You were his plan. He used your fear against you, just like he used Dooku. You're just another pawn in his game." Anakin growled, slashing at her with a renewed fury. Their blades crashed together, lighting up the dim corridor with blue fire. Ahsoka fought with everything she had, but Anakin was relentless. Every strike was heavier, angrier, fueled by something far worse than rage, grief. She was losing. Then she saw it, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. His old self, buried beneath the darkness. And Ahsoka took her chance. She deactivated one saber and lunged, slamming the hilt against his wrist. His blade wavered, just for a second. That was all she needed. She caught his free hand in hers, gripping it tightly. "You're stronger than this." Anakin froze. He looked at the younglings, at the terror in their eyes. Then, after a long moment, he took out his calm and ordered the 501st to stand down. "Ahsoka," he whispered. His eyes, no longer glowing with Sith corruption, filled with something else. Regret. Pain. She stepped back, giving him space. "We have to stop him," she said gently. "We have to stop Palpatine." Anakin took a slow, shuddering breath. Then he nodded. The two turned toward the shadows looming over Coruscant. Sidious awaited, and this time they would fight him together. Sidious was not pleased. As Anakin and Ahsoka stormed into his private chambers, the Sith Lord's yellowed gaze narrowed. "So," he mused, "you have returned to the light, Lord Vader?" Anakin ignited his saber. "My name is Anakin Skywalker," Sidious sneered. "Then you will die as Anakin Skywalker." The room erupted in lightning and flame. Sidious unleashed a torrent of Sith lightning, sending Anakin and Ahsoka crashing backward. Anakin barely caught the attack on his blade, his arms trembling under the sheer force of the Dark Lord's power. Ahsoka moved fast, darting around Sidious with the speed of a shadow, her sabers spinning. She struck low, forcing the Sith Lord to shift focus. Sidious countered with inhuman speed, spinning through the air with a howl, his crimson blade clashing against both Anakin and Ahsoka. The duel was a storm of motion. Sidious struck with blinding ferocity, forcing them to fight as one to keep up. Ahsoka was fast. Anakin was powerful. But Sidious was pure darkness. With a snarl, he flung Ahsoka across the chamber, slamming her against a pillar. She collapsed, her vision swimming. Sidious raised his hands, dark lightning crackling. Anakin roared, unleashing the full power of the Force, catching the lightning and sending it back at the Sith Lord. Sidious screamed, his own attack overwhelming him. Anakin pressed forward, his saber striking in blinding, precise movements, each attack fueled by righteous fury. With a final strike, Anakin severed Sidious' hands. The Dark Lord collapsed, his body writhing in agony. Then Anakin delivered the final blow. Ahsoka, regaining herself, looked up. "It's over," she whispered. Anakin stood over the fallen Emperor, his blade humming. He had won. Sidious was finished. For the first time in years, Anakin Skywalker was truly free. Drop the scenarios you would like to see in the comments, and I will pick one every week. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you in the next one.